Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews Saturday Conversation Show, a weekly interview series where I talk to entertainment media personalities and content creators about their work and love of movies. Today's guest is Christian Toto, the host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast and founder of Hollywood in Toto website. An award-winning film critic and journalist for over 20 years, Christian has established himself as a leading conservative voice when it comes to films in the film industry. I'm glad to say, Christian, you are here with me now. I know you've been on the show before. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. How have you been?
Good. I'm glad to be back. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. I don't know about you, Christian, but I'm getting absolutely slammed with screenings and screeners as the end of the year is coming up and award season and everything else. I'm sure over on your end as well, it's just a never-ending glut of that kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, there's a stack of screeners just out of reach, and then you have all the digital screeners. It's a good problem to have, and my only real issue is I just can't watch them all, and I think that's unfair on a certain level. But I am trying. I will watch as many as humanly possible, but can't watch every film given to us. But doing our best, and it's a fun time of the year.
It is a fun time of the year. I want to go back a bit when it comes to your career. You've pretty much established yourself for over 20 years as kind of like I said in my introduction, the conservative voice, but it could have been so much different for you. Is it true that you had aspirations for as an art career, like you were like an art major and and that was kind of like where you were thinking of heading as a career?
Just my entire life. Yeah. I've got 3 art degrees that I've yet to use at a professional basis. And that was what my obsession was. I've always loved movies, but I never really thought about being a critic or an entertainment journalist. I wanted to draw comic books and went to school. And then toward the end, I thought, my gosh, I don't even know how to make this a career. I don't think I'm good enough. And, I just didn't seem to have the chops or the path forward. Really didn't know what to do. And at the same time, I was just doing movie reviews for the school newspaper just as a lark, and really enjoyed it and got kind of wrapped up in that newspaper, became I think the assistant managing editor or something like that, got really involved with the whole process and thought, I like this. I enjoy this. I have some chops as far as writing is concerned. It's interesting to me. And, maybe I could steer myself into a entertainment journalist career. And of course, they don't just hand those gigs away. So I had to make it happen. It took a while. And then the industry collapsed around myself, so I had to reinvent myself once again.
You and I have an incredibly similar path in regards to that. I wanted so badly to be a rock musician. That was my thing. I was like in bands, I was writing music and demoing and all that stuff. And then I was like, look, I can't do it like this. It's just I wasn't, the rock star life wasn't for me. And then I was like, well, I'm going to try to get into the management side of stuff. So I went to a school, got a degree in arts management, and then during that time, something happened where I got disillusioned with the whole music industry, and I got into movies like big time. Serpico was a movie that, like, for me, just changed my life around that time, and then I started writing about movies, and I started my website and everything else. But at the same time, I was writing for print publications. That was the same with you. You said like it took you a long time. It was a Pittsburgh newspaper at first. That you were like a Metro reporter, weren't you? And that's kind of like how you first got copy in, right?
Yes, and not a good one. I was basically making up as I go along. Looking back, I'm sure I did okay, but it was not my passion. It was not my skill set. But you do have to start somewhere. And I worked with copy editors who taught me some of the basics. And I think just from the ground up, I was a decent writer, but I needed to get, refine my skills. I'm still doing that right now. But yeah, it was an interesting path. And, I interviewed Eric Alper recently. He is a music PR professional, and he's someone who I think he really did want to be a musician, live that lifestyle, and it didn't work out for him. But he's created this curious path for him where he promotes artists and he celebrates his love of music, and he's all over Twitter. He's a really fun follow on Twitter. I think it's at that Eric Alper. And, we don't always follow the direct paths that we're meant to be on, that we thought we were meant to be on, but it all matters where you end up and if you're enjoying yourself. And I know you love what you do, and I do too. And it's not easy. It's a lot of work, and I'm constantly, I don't take days off really. Once in a blue moon, I'll maybe, take a knee, and it's shocking to both me and my family because they just expect daddy to keep on working. But but this is the path I've led and I've blazed, and I'm very happy. I mean, ultimately, I'm doing what I love to do, and that's pretty great.
Is it true that the first official review you filed was for Wild Bill, the Jeff Bridges movie?
It was, and then my second one was Batman and Robin, which was much more fun to write.
Was that for the Pittsburgh paper, or were you the Washington Post at that time?
Yeah, that was Pittsburgh Tribune Review, which was the secondary paper in Pittsburgh. There was the Post Gazette, was the biggie, and then we were the second tier. And there was a longtime film critic at the paper, and he went on vacation. I just rose my hand and said, "Hey, can I take over for the week or two where he's gone?" And they said yes. It was delightful.
It's funny looking back now. I remember the first time I was published in something that wasn't my website, and I was like, "Man, I made it! I'm on paper. This is forever kind of thing." Of course, after around that time, everything kind of just dissolved, right? And these days, it's hard to find anyone who'll pay for film criticism in print anyway. How did the move to Washington Post come about from the Pittsburgh? That's a pretty big jump from one state to the other.
Well, it was actually Washington Times and the Washington Post. So in both cities, I was basically at the second tier paper, which is fine. I think when you're second tier, you try harder. I was in Pittsburgh for 3 years, and I just didn't feel like that was my home. It's kind of a weird thing, and it's maybe a long, boring story, but wanted to move elsewhere, decided to go to the DC area. And then I got a job I was overseeing a newsletter about interactive marketing and PR news. It was a terrible match. I was terrible at it. I got fired in short order. And then I went back to journalism again with the Washington Times. But yeah, I mean, I think that most careers, you stumble and bumble along the way. I mean, listen, God bless those who are able to find their niche, be successful from the jump, and go from there. It wasn't me. And but I'm grateful for every step along the journey. And I worked in DC for 10 years. I had an amazing time. I mean, I became a de facto concert reviewer, so I'd see Van Halen and Billy Joel and all these great shows. I saw a lot of local productions, theatrical productions. That was Arena Stage and the Kennedy Center. I mean, what a wonderful time for me looking back at my younger days. So no regrets at all. And then, but when I went to leave DC, I'm now in Denver. I've been here for about almost 20 years. I had to reinvent myself again. So that's, it's a brutal industry. And like you kind of intimated, things started to change dramatically. The shift to online, the dying of newspapers, you name it. And I had to kind of figure out where I was going to be and all that. And basically just went rogue and went solo at the same time.
You saw Van Halen. Was that with Sammy Hagar around that time?
I believe so. I believe it was. I don't think I ever saw David Lee Roth, but yeah, it was fun. I saw Billy Joel and Elton John. They had a Piano Man tour, and that was great. And it was a very interesting time, that's for sure.
Oh man, just so like Van Halen only came down here once with Gary Sharon. They never toured outside of the US, like hardly. And I said to myself at that time, I was like, I love Van Halen, I love Extreme, but I can't see these. I'll wait till they come again. And I never did, of course. Everything is how it is now. So 9/11, when that happened, it changed everything. I mean, to me, 9/11 is like, it's almost like, BC AD. It's like you could draw a fine line right between there and everything in modern Western culture, from politics to pop culture to everything. Okay, and for yourself as well, this was like a moment in time. You were living in DC. The Pentagon was attacked, and you, from what I read, you used to drive past the Pentagon all the time when you used to go to work
every morning.
Right? And this when this event happened for you, this really was not only, of course, you were like living amongst one of the greatest, terrorism attacks and probably the biggest terrorist attack on America, but as in a personal kind of political kind of like perspective, this was a moment for you where you said, who am I? What am I? And what am I going to be moving forward, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really did wake me up. It's funny. I worked at 2 right-leaning newspapers, and at the time I was hired by each one, I wasn't political. I don't think it was even right of center. I was kind of aimless in a way, politically speaking. Yeah. So it wasn't like, oh, good, I get to work for the right-leaning newspaper in town. It was like, oh, it's a job I can write. I'm there. So, the Washington Post had hired me at the time. I would have jumped there as well. But then when that happened, yeah, I became more politically aware. And, looking back, it's so complicated. I think the ramifications of those attacks are still being felt today with the Patriot Act and other sort of political issues in the United States and maybe and globally as well. But I just looked at how both parties reacted to it, and maybe it was an extreme reaction, but one party wanted to take the fight to the terrorists, and one party was often saying, well, why do they hate us? What did we do wrong? And I chose a side. So, I think the only thing that Dennis Miller and I have in common is that I think it woke him up too. And again, I had no personal connection. I did live in DC. I was driving near the Pentagon every day, but it wasn't like I lost a loved one. But it was, you couldn't live through that moment and not feel changed in some way. And that's when I began my journey. And along the way, I realized that there were very few conservative leaning film critics out there. I mean, you can count them on one hand practically. So, I thought, well, it makes sense to me organically. And then also professionally, maybe there's an opportunity here where I could be myself and then, speak for half the country. And that's where I've been ever since.
Just not only the film industry at that time, but pop culture in general at that time was incredibly. I mean, I remember the one thing I remember around that time was just this glut of kind of like anti-Bush rhetoric, but also a lot of these kind of movies that were coming out just about, especially when the Iraq War hit, like when the movies that come out from there, it's just like one after the other after the other.
Yeah.
From Hurt Locker to In the Valley of Elah to all sorts of movies, right? And when that's happening, like, what was your perspective of the especially when it came to the film industry at that time in regards to a political context? Was there even a feeling of like, well, they're more kind of like left wing based because they're it's an entertainment industry and the arts just kind of goes that way, or was it more kind of like after 9/11 was it more kind of like almost a religious kind of cultish fervor to it? Because that's what it kind of feels like to me these days.
Yeah, I think it's changed since then, but maybe that was a pretty big pivot point. And I think that artists were so obsessed with what was going on. Many were anti-war, anti-Iraq, anti-Bush, and they wanted to do something. And if they were storytellers, then they tell stories. And I think one of the problems with that is that when you're so emotionally invested in a story, in a narrative, in a side, sometimes that swamps your creative impulses. And I think, when it comes to the Vietnam War, we saw a lot of great films in the mid 80s after 10, 15 years had passed.
Yeah.
Platoon and Hamburger Hill and Full Metal Jacket. But this was, making war movies while the war was going on, while soldiers were in harm's way. And I had an issue with that from a moral point of view. It just seems like maybe that's not the best path. The films were not really remarkable in significant ways. I think they almost all bombed, no pun intended, dramatically. And so it was an interesting time. I also look back at that time and think, the causes that I supported, I don't know if I would support them today. I mean, the war was not well managed. It was maybe the wrong choice. But also, back in that period, all the artists were about free speech. You cannot silence us. And there was a little bit of, hey, maybe we shouldn't talk about this. We shouldn't talk about that. There are people in harm's way. This is the wrong time to be, attacking your own country. And so I understand that sentiment among the left that, we have to speak out. That is our right. That is, a core value. We can't lose that just because we're at war. And it's so fascinating because the left today and Hollywood today is so either, sitting on their hands when it comes to free speech or just anti-free speech outwardly. They don't care that there's censorship running amok right now. And it's really been hard for me as someone who loves Hollywood, loves movies, loves these actors to a certain degree. And yet, I don't care that I don't agree with their politics. It doesn't bother me. I don't agree with my wife's politics. But to see them lay down as censorship is raging and how free speech is really under attack on multiple fronts, it's been hard for me. It really hurts me because I love what I do. It's a passion profession for me. But to see the big actors of our age just say nothing about these issues is terrible. Neil Young can't stop talking against free speech. But in 2008 or 9, he had a freedom of speech tour. He literally toured in support of free speech, and now he wants Joe Rogan's silence. He wants X, silence. He doesn't want any part of Elon Musk's platform, even though it's a freer version of free speech. So it just makes me sad. And times change, people change, parties change, philosophies change, and I think that's often a healthy thing. But I don't think the results have been healthy.
I have a kind of a theory as to how that or everything's happening now, and I think it kind of happened around the same time where the internet started to really become a place, that where people not only just browse, but where people could make business and could,
Mm.
like yourself, like you started TotoWatch.com around that time. You started to pivot to go more to the online sphere. It was still more of a Wild West kind of back then, but there was still something that was very there was opportunity there and there was profit there. And what I think kind of happened around that time, so you had 9/11 and you had kind of like a lot of people having this self-debate about identity in regards to what it used to be a patriot or whether patriotism as well. But then there was a religion aspect to it as well. What was
Mhm.
happening at that time, from what I remember, was a whole kind of like militant atheist thing with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, which I know you interviewed, and Sam Harrison. They started coming in to it as well. Then people started questioning the spiritual value of a nation and such. And then the internet came in. And I think when
Mhm.
people started going away from more traditional aspects of belief, something came in and took in kind of filling that gap. And to me, what I think that thing was pop culture. I think pop culture really started to establish itself
Mhm.
at that time as almost kind of like something that people would worship to the point now that when Black Panther comes out like 10 years later, people treat that movie like it's like the second coming. I don't know if you saw it yesterday, but there was a post because it was Chadwick Boseman's it would have been Chadwick Boseman's birthday, and a poster went up from his actual official Twitter account from whoever was running it. It was like Chadwick Boseman's face and always looked like a halo around him. And like it was
Uh-huh.
like, when you were here, you changed our lives, and when you're gone, but all kind of thing. I was like, he's a great actor and he was a great guy, but he's not Christ. Let's just take it easy here. And I think that's what happened. I think a lot of people that there was a void that kind of came in there. Do you think like at that time pop culture was starting to really take on more than just a bunch of guys at the Star Trek convention, and it started to like
Mhm.
become like this kind of bigger thing where people not only were starting to put stock in these figures and stock in these characters and these
Mhm.
universes to such an extent, and also the celebrities behind them to such an extent that almost like felt always kind of like religious in the point where now these same figures can say, well, like a Neil Young or like any other number of people, we should go against the things that we once held dear because
Mhm.
because we kind of demanded it as part of our covenants as part of the artist collective or what have you.
It's an interesting thought. I think you could point to the rise of Comic-Con culture as a significant defense of your argument. Because when I was a kid, I used to buy comic books and hide them because I didn't want my buddies at school to see them. And
Mm,
all of a sudden, Comic-Con ruled pop culture, and being a nerd was actually a point of pride. And I think we kind of celebrated that whole renaissance in art and pop culture art, I guess you could say. So yeah, I mean, I also think more recently that's merged with a more, I guess, hard progressive ideology, which has kind of taken on elements of faith as well. When you talk about woke or climate change or identity politics, I mean, I think maybe they've all merged at this point. But that is an interesting thought that pop culture took a new power, new perspective. And I think that the artists themselves realized that when they did something, it mattered. That when they made a comment, it would go ricochet around on the news cycle, or if a Saturday Night Live comedian would make fun of a politician, it would leave a mark. It would cause that politician to be branded in a certain way, which was often negative. And I think
Sarah
when the
Palin, for
arts,
example.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's my exact example.
yeah.
And I think when they saw that, they thought, oh my gosh, we can affect change in ways that we didn't think was possible
Mm.
maybe a few years ago. So, I think there's a lot of cultural winds shifting in the last 20 or so years. I don't think you're wrong. I think it's a collection of different forces, but I do think that faith, kind of more traditional faith, has has receded to a certain degree, and I don't think that's had a positive impact on our culture. Just
I
looking
don't.
at
Yeah.
looking at where we are right now, I'd be hard pressed anyone to argue that things are better today.
And around that time when you started doing what would Toto watch, you started working for Breitbart News as well. And Andrew Breitbart, I think, not only had a big impact on you, but I saw so many other people, like other people who were working there, like Ben Shapiro, for example, so many others were,
Mhm.
where he kind of like his thing was, look, pop culture is downhill from politics. I mean, it's one is rolling into the other right now. We need to get on top of this, and he was like one of the first kind of guys who was like, we need to get on top of this. We need to put our perspective out there as well. How influential was Andrew Breitbart and working at Breitbart News to you, as you kind of like establishing yourself as a freelance film critic, as a solo entrepreneur, but also an online voice who was speaking on behalf of people who weren't really getting that type of representation in kind of like in the movies in the pop culture sphere?
He influenced so many people and in ways that I don't think we realize. I think he directly influenced me, but I think that some of the things you just mentioned, as I'm thinking about it, like, oh my gosh, maybe I saw what he was doing. I saw his voice. I saw his playful spirit. And, the stuff I do is very pugnacious at times. I throw some sharp elbows on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. But I don't think I'm mean. I don't think I'm vicious. I try not to be. And I think that was one of the things that Andrew Breitbart was so good at. But the one thing that still impresses me about Andrew is that I'm still talking to people today who are not big and famous, who are trying to make some sort of art in their lives or trying to create in the way that he suggested we create. And they'll say, yeah, I talked to Andrew years ago and he supported me, or he called me back, and he was just constantly reaching out to people, constantly inspiring them, constantly knowing that he couldn't do this alone. And I just thought that was such a wonderful thing. And it's been very frustrating to me to see as right-leaning art, for lack of a better phrase, is rising up. You've got the Daily Wire, you've got Blaze TV, you've got all these different platforms, large and very small, and that there's no sense of real camaraderie that, oh my gosh, I work for Blaze, but maybe I should write about the Daily Wire's new movie because it looks like it's something that we should all be talking about. There's very, very, very little of that. And I spoke to someone, I won't mention who, and I won't mention the outlet, and we had this great conversation about just that thing. And he told me that that's that platform's mission moving forward, that he would help, change things and do that. And that platform has not done that and has not changed the way they work. And, listen, maybe the new Daily Wire movie, Lady Ballers, maybe it'll have an effect and people will talk about it for good and for bad. I haven't seen it yet. But that's a shame. It's a shame because if Michael Moore puts out a movie, I'm saying Roger Moore, it's quite a difference. If Michael Moore puts out a movie tomorrow, he knows that Variety and The Hollywood Reporter and Deadline and TheWrap.com and USA Today and almost any media outlet is going to talk to him and spread the word about it. And that's an important part of the puzzle. You need people to be aware of these things. I often hear about movies or ask people about, hey, did you see so-and-so or that movie? And often they'll say, oh, I never heard of it. People need to hear about things before they can sample them. So that's been very frustrating, just in general. So it's been one of my pet peeves. And my website and my podcast, it's not huge, neither yet. Someday maybe. It's bigger than what would Toto watch, that's for sure. But I always promote artists like that. I have an open forum. If someone emails me and says, hey, I just wrote a novel, it's right-leaning, or I'm a conservative and I'm really struggling to get my name out there, I invite them on my podcast. I invite them on my website and say, share it, sing it, talk about it. I wish more people did that. And again, it's partly because I want more voices out there. It shouldn't just be left of center voices in the pop culture landscape. It should be everyone. And then the audience can decide, oh, I like this. Oh, I like that. Oh, this progressive movie is wonderful. And this conservative movie, it stinks. But at least give us the choice.
True, very true. I want to take a little segue here and play a little game I like to do called Choose Between Two. So, Christian, here we go. I'm going to give you two different topics or names, and I want you to choose between the two. You can give me your reasons behind the answer you give. Okay, so the first one is going to be for cinema cowboys. Clint Eastwood or John Wayne?
Oh, gosh, it's funny. I grew up with Clint Eastwood. I did not grow up with John Wayne. And as much as I love my father, he's passed away a few years now, he, for some reason, instilled in me a dislike of John Wayne. He didn't like John Wayne. He thought he was a one-trick pony, no quasi pun intended. And so I've always had a bias against John Wayne. But in recent years, when I became an adult, I watched some movies like The Searchers, things like that. I thought, wow, this guy's really good. He really has something. So I have to pick Clint Eastwood, but I have my appreciation for John Wayne has grown over the years after after being gaslit by my wonderful father.
The Monkees or the Beatles?
Oh gosh, it's the Monkees easily. Listen, the Beatles to me, I think on paper they're the greatest band ever, 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 ever. But my childhood was just swamped with Monkees music, Monkees TV shows, searching down to find the Monkees albums that were out of print. So it's a deeply emotional and irrational choice of the Monkees.
Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy?
Oh, that's hard. Oh man, that's a
It's a humdinger.
that's a photo finish. The Abbott and Costello movies are the ones I watch as a child, and I love them dearly. So I'd say Abbott and Costello. But to me, March of the Wooden Soldiers was maybe my favorite movie as a child, and that was a lovely comedy with them and kind of interweaving all these different fairy tales into the film. And 3 or 4 years ago, there was, maybe it was called Stan and Ollie with
Yeah, that's right.
Steve
With John C.
Coogan.
Riley, Steve Coogan, yeah.
What a wonderful film. It was bittersweet. And boy, those actors, they really brought those classic comic foils to life in ways I didn't think was possible. So if you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend it. But yeah, it's Abbott it's a close one though.
Die Hard or Lethal Weapon?
I am not part of the Die Hard cult. And
Me
I know
either.
that
Me
it's
either.
a weird, and I watched it with my son maybe 3 years ago, just to kind of say, okay, maybe fresh eyes, blah blah blah. It's a very good film. I have no problem with it. I understand why Bruce Willis became a star because of it, a movie star, not just a TV star. But I think Lethal Weapon is more complicated. It's got a bluesy riff to it that I've always enjoyed. And I just think that Mel Gibson is a spectacular actor. He's a great director. I know he's a very troubled soul. I won't defend the things he's done and said, but as a movie star, I've always thought he was first rate, and great chemistry between him and Danny Glover. I think they're making a new sequel now. It sounds like a terrible idea, honestly, but we'll see.
Favorite cinema snack, popcorn or candy?
Always candy, always chocolate. I'm not a big snack guy when it comes to watching movies, maybe because I'm a cheapskate and the cost of entry is too profound as a journalist who doesn't make a lot of money. But yeah, I don't know. I've never been a big chomper of food when I watch movies. We'll do it once in a while as a family, and I'll make homemade popcorn and melt the butter, old school. But to me, a candy bar is a candy bar. It's one of the greatest things in the world.
And last one, streaming or physical media?
Oh, that's hard. I've got a whole library of physical media downstairs in my house,
too.
and I love it. And it's a cherished possession, and I have an emotional attachment to it. But I have to say, the speed of streaming, and if I know a movie is available on one of the platforms I subscribe to, I'm hard pressed to go down to the library, look through the A's, the B's, the C's, pick it up, put it in the Blu-ray player, hit pause. I don't know. It's just, the streaming is pretty spectacular. But of course, having said that, you want to own the physical media now because they're changing things, they're erasing things, things just get out of stock. Here's my ultimate embarrassing monkey story. So I grew up in the 80s, and I guess I was in my late teens, early 20s. And then TV stopped showing the Monkees show, and I was devastated. And I waited and waited and waited for them to bring back the Monkees. I wanted to see my favorite show. Again, I'm old, so this is when they didn't. If it wasn't there, you couldn't see it. I couldn't go to YouTube. I couldn't buy it here or there. And then the Monkees had I think it was a 48-hour Monkees marathon, MTV. And I taped every episode on VHS at the time, which is now an antiquated format. Because I said, you know what, bleep you guys. I'm not going to be beholden to you. If I want to watch the Monkees, I want to have every episode. And so I did it on 4-hour mode, and I woke up every 4 hours during the night to put in a new cassette. So that's my wildly embarrassing Monkees story that I'm oddly proud of.
Let's get back to where we are in regards to your career, and kind of like how the parallels with what was happening with technology at the time, especially with social media. Because once you get out there on your own, social media, I think, to me, was and still is the ultimate marketing tool. If you use it correctly, if you know how to use it, you know how to get out there, the reach with it is really impressive. On the other end, you got all the stuff that we've been talking about, right? Especially, I mean, I don't know about you. I've only just came back to X or Twitter in the last 6 months or so. I was off it for like 3 years. I deleted my account and everything, posted the whole Trump thing because I could, and then George Floyd and everything. I couldn't stand just being on it anymore. But I know the importance of a lot of those kind of like Facebooks and everything else as well. When you first started putting together Hollywood in Toto, and at that time, and when I imagine around that time, social media was like a really kind of big thing. What was your kind of like feel of social media at that time? And did you have any idea or turn into this kind of like real force of like not only a cultural kind of force, but it became like this real kind of political tool as well, which we saw with the Twitter files, like just how much in kind of like how incestuous the relationship was between political parties and especially Democrat and places like Twitter and Facebook during COVID. It was quite troubling to see that being revealed at the time.
I don't think I have a strong answer, in part because I didn't know enough back then. My site is almost 10 years old now, but back then when it first started, I was new. My previous website didn't make any money. It was just sort of an introductory step, but I didn't really have the marketing chops that I do now. I mean, I still have a lot to learn, but I really spent the last 10 years learning about marketing, about business plans, about my message, about having a brand. So it's really been a work in progress over this decade, in part because I was an art major. I didn't have this training. I didn't have this background. I didn't know what I was doing. So basically I went on different podcasts or listened to different podcasts and said, hey, teach me. And so there are a lot of great podcasts that teach you about social media, about branding, about copywriting, about all these different things I know nothing about. So I've spent the last decade just figuring out what I need to do as a business person. And I'd say in the last 5-6 years, things finally came together and I finally started making a living at this, a significant living where I could rely on it. Up until then, a lot of freelance, a lot of prayer, a lot of leaning on my wife, who was making more money than I was at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a powerful force. I talk to a lot of comedians and they are really beholden to what social media can do for them. I mean, I've got a gig coming up. Come see me. This is my newest bit. I can try material out on social media. And of course, as you and I know, sometimes those bits get censored or they get shadow banned or they get punished or pummeled or you name it. So that's one of the reasons why this whole censorship era is so damaging. But yeah, and it's been a work in progress for me to figure out who I am and what I do, what I need to do. And I'm still learning. I tried Pinterest. I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth. I didn't think it was a good fit for me. And as much as I love X, and I do love X, I'm on it 24/7 practically. It doesn't really move the needle on my brand. I don't get a lot of clicks from my website from that. But, I enjoy it. I get information from it. And I think I've developed a lot of I don't want to say odd relationships, but relationships with people that I've never met. I mean, it was funny over the summer, one of my friends on Twitter came to Denver and we went to a ball game. He treated me to a ball game. I never met the guy, but we became friends on social media. And he's like, I'm going to be in Denver. Let's just go hang out. And we had a nice time. So, it's just the cyber world we live in right now. But yeah, it's, each of the platforms have plus and minuses, and you have to learn it. You can't stick your head in the sand. And I will say that I've been told I should be on TikTok, and that terrifies me on 8 levels.
Oh no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. No.
So I'm still thinking as a pragmatic step if I should go there, or just at least have a presence there, or just maybe if I shoot video, which I'm going to be doing very soon, do I just throw it up there just for giggles? I don't know, but it's a whole learning curve for me. It's daunting, that's for sure.
One thing that happened, which was an incredible negative with the whole social media thing, especially in the last, say 5 years or so, was a whole kind of like woke movement that happened around that time. It all happened, in my opinion, around the time that maybe around the time of Obama's second term, leading up to the Trump presidency. And then you had all the stuff after that. And, Twitter was used for like, all sorts of nefarious shenanigans, punch a Nazi, all that kind of stuff, and all the crap that came from that and all that. And I think that led to a lot of people getting really kind of frustrated with what was happening on those platforms. I know it did for me, which is why I left. But some people, talk the talk, and some people walk the walk. You walk the walk. You actually wrote a book about this called Virtue Bombs, and we talked about this your book previously. I'll put the podcast link in my notes below if people want to listen to that. But when it came to writing that book, was it always an intention of yours to always write a book about something in regards to the film industry or the movie industry or pop culture, even before Virtue Bombs? Or did you find at that time it was like, this is the perfect thing to write about because there's prime material, number one. Number two, people are talking about it quite a bit. And number three, I have like a stake in this because, especially at that time, I think if you were a conservative voice in anything at all, let it be alone be a conservative voice as a janitor or anything like that, the perspective was that people were going to like shame you and try to hunt you down, and the whole cancer culture thing was really ripe at that time. Is that what we're kind of lived to the idea? Is that what led to the idea of Virtue Bombs in the first place?
I've always wanted to write a book, but just like the generic, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I wrote a book? But I never pursued it in any capacity. I never really thought about what the mission would be. If I did, it was just like a vague notion in my mind. And I know that other bloggers and other pundits, it's good to have written a book. It's sort of a calling card. It's almost like an oversized business card. And I understood it from that level, but I just never gave it a lot of thought. And because I'm doing all the things I do, I'm just too busy. I just never thought about it in a very concrete way. But I was interviewing someone for a story, and he was a book publisher. And he said, hey, we should do a book together. And I thought, yeah, that would be nice. And so that prompted the idea. And then I thought, well, what do I write about? And like a second later, I thought, I'm just gonna write about woke because it's all I cover. It's all I think about. It has permeated the industry. It's had a very toxic effect on creativity. And to my knowledge, there was no book, I still think there isn't, about Hollywood and woke and the intersection of the two. So the good news was it was quick to write. It was all top of mind. It was all things I was very passionate about. I had a lot of knowledge on the subject. I knew what I wanted to write. And so it all flowed from there. And, writing a book is not easy. It's time consuming. We all know the drill. But I think as a first book, and probably my only book, it went okay. So that was positive. And, it flew. I wrote up an early outline of the chapters I wanted. I think the finished book was essentially that. I might have added a thing or two. And then I was lucky enough to have enough connections where I'd speak to some people about the industry. Some people talked to me honestly, some people didn't. So I think sadly it's a year or so old, but it still holds up. It's still applicable. I mean, I could do an update on it. There could be some changes to it, but it still has a grip on our culture and on Hollywood. And it's a shame. And I really, I may have said the first time around, I was just hoping that, boy, wouldn't it be great? Because these projects takes time. And even when you're finished the book, it's months and months until it actually hits the stands. I thought, wouldn't it be cool if this book is a complete bomb? And by the time it hits, that this whole fever is broken. But it didn't happen that way. So
no. Around that time, your podcast game was really kind of like up and running as well. How did you find approaching the whole kind of podcast thing? Because for me, when I first started doing my podcast, it took a little bit of time to it kind of reminded me of the initial stages of me being the film critic, trying to find my voice and my writing style and everything else. It was a different medium, but it was the same sort of type of experimentation. What am I going to talk about? Who am I talking to? What type of format am I doing? Is that something that you had to go through as well to try to find like what type of voice you're going to be? Because one thing where a voice is like, where people read your words, another thing where you are the voice and how you want to project that to the world.
Yeah, I think in almost every way I'm a late bloomer. So it's actually worked to my advantage to a certain degree, because by the time I became a podcaster, I've been doing a whole bunch of radio, quick appearances, longer appearances. So I was able to understand how to speak in ways that maybe were a little more succinct. I wasn't rambling on and on, hopefully, unless I'm doing that right now. So I had a little bit of experience there. And it's all, I mean, this as well as anybody, it's all about the reps. You got to do it. You got to keep doing it. And then, like you said, I think the voice, and it's not my physical voice or your physical voice, it is your voice, your persona, your brand, what you say, what you mean. That's critical. And I think I developed that by writing a ton over the years. And honestly, I think I've just really found it in recent months on my new podcast, which is same name, but I just feel more confident. I
Yeah.
feel more expressive. I feel like, oh, I get it. I finally get it. This is what this is all about. So I think you just have to kind of go through that process. And there's a podcaster I enjoy, Pat Flynn, and he does a lot of social media marketing tips. It's Smart Passive Income is his main show. And often, well, not often, but from time to time, he'll talk about how raw he was at the beginning, how bad he was at the beginning.
Mm.
And then he'd play a clip of his first show, and he's terrible. His voice is subdued. He doesn't have any spark to it. There's no pizzazz. I mean, listen, you have to have a little bit of showbiz in your presentation. And, it's not just, hey, this is my show. I mean, even if the content is great, if you're not interesting, then people are going to tune away. So I just thought that was great of Pat to kind of show that old side of him and to let people know that, hey, if you want to be a podcaster, you may stink at the beginning. You may really have a long learning curve, but that's okay. You just jump in there, you get it done, and you'll get better and you'll enjoy it and you'll build an audience. So I think all those things are important. It's humbling for sure, but you don't get a voice without trying it out again and again and again.
Let's do another game before we hit the home stretch here.
Okay.
So this is called rapid fire questions. I'm going to throw some questions to you, and some of them are serious, some of them are silly, but I want to know what your reaction is to them. Greatest actor?
Yikes. Strictly, I mean, I've loved Dustin Hoffman for years. Gene Hackman is someone I adore. Boy, that's like asking your favorite movie, unless you have one in the what's the word for the gun
in the cannon in the chamber
like that.
In the chamber.
That's it.
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know. And I think that is one of the most subjective things possible. There have been great actors who just never got a great role or never had the breaks they deserved. I will say it's not Keanu Reeves, though I think seems like he's a lovely person, but he wouldn't be in my top 1,000. But yeah, I mean, I guess I should say like Laurence Olivier or some of the classic answers, but being a critic is a very personal, very subjective, very emotional gig. So I can't help but think of the people that I grew up watching, like Pacino and De Niro and people like that.
Yeah, Pacino's mine for sure. Pacino, De Niro, but Pacino, I think, like it's always been between them two for me. But I think Pacino's got the edge on him. Greatest director?
I think from a pop culture, popcorn perspective, Steven Spielberg reigns supreme. But if I go in a different direction, oh gosh, these are hard questions, and I don't have quick answers. Ridley Scott has reached some heights that I think are unbelievable. James Cameron as an action director is the tops. The Coen brothers as storytellers are spectacular. Yeah, I'll just stop there. And these are, and I think one of the areas that I'm weak in as a film critic is film history, film lore. I could mention the classics, the Cappers and the John Fords, but
yeah,
it didn't have the personal resonance of when I became a movie fan. It didn't lock in during my childhood, so it's hard to kind of make them as my personal favorites.
A legend, living or dead, you'd love to interview?
Elvis Costello, maybe top. John Cleese. Yeah, I think those are my top two.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
An abomination.
Yes.
I don't even like.
Yes.
I don't even like uttering the words in the same sentence.
Yes.
It's much as much I like toppings on pizza. There's something pure about just a cheese pizza. It's almost like you don't need anything else. But I like meatballs. I like sausage. I like pepperoni. I like jalapenos. There's lots of great toppings, but there's something innocent and pure and perfect about a cheese pizza that needs nothing else. So that's my basic pizza philosophy. But yeah, pineapple, it shouldn't be in the same room.
Raising Arizona, still your favorite movie?
Yeah, it's never been surpassed. I don't know what would surpass it. It's locked in. It's in a safe. You can't crack it. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of the movies that I've really loved in recent years. I really love Jojo Rabbit. I really love Joker. Some of the Marvel movies, just to be able to watch them again and again and again is magical to me. but nothing has come close to Raising Arizona. I mean, to watch a movie and every time you see it, something new opens up to you. I think that's such a gift.
And final one, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? You just watched it recently. I know you're not in the cult of Die Hard, but as a as someone who's like, I think especially around the time of the internet, the whole Die Hard Christmas movie cult has really kind of sprung from that. Do you consider it so? I personally do not. What do you think?
Ironically, I just had this conversation on a local radio station just a few hours before
Well,
you and I
it's
turned
the
the mics
season,
on.
right? So yeah,
it is a season. I will say that the conversation / debate about it is part of the Christmas season. It is as traditional as eggnog and mistletoe and the Christmas tree. It's not something that I watch every year as a Christmas favorite, but you know what? If there are so many people out there who cling to it, who discuss it, who love it, who mention it this time of the year, then it is. I think the people have spoken. I think that's the ultimate arbiter.
I just got to say though that if Die Hard is a Christmas movie, then Lethal Weapon has to be a Christmas movie as well, because that's movie set in Christmas as well. I mean, there's a freaking scene where an undercover Mel Gibson as Riggs is doing a cocaine deal within a bunch of Christmas trees. There's a line where a guy says, "I tell you what, I give you any Christmas tree on a lot." Like that's a whole kind of thing about it. So if one is in, then the other has to be in as well, right? So
yeah, and to me, Elf is the ultimate Christmas movie. It's what I watch with my family every year without fail. I can't imagine a Christmas without it. And I always give kudos to Jon Favreau, the director, because he went out purposely to make a movie that would be timeless. He didn't want to hire, the actors of the moment, didn't want to use the songs of the moment, the hip phrases of the moment. He created something that could withstand the test of time, and he scored a bullseye. It's an amazing film.
Just want to get one more question in before we finish here. So We've talked about how all these changes have been going on as your career has progressed and has you kind of grown as a person and as a film critic and also as an online presence. What is your perspective on where the future is going to go now with films and cinema? Because we're at an incredibly interesting time right now where all these things have happened, like the woke stuff and the post 9/11, all this stuff that's been changing things in the film industry and how to kind of approach stuff. Streaming as well, of course, is a huge thing with the strikes that we just had. So on one end, you got these emerging kind of distributors and studios, Angel Studios, Kingdom, Daily Wire, Blaze, all these guys, right? And on the other end, you got something like Disney, which for a long time has kind of like placed itself on the plateau. It's kind of like woke conglomerate, right? But that is bombing big time. I mean, I think in this year alone, it's lost like almost like $1 billion, like in revenue and stuff from like all the box office bombs that it has. There's kind of like balance. It's still more to the Disney side of things because it's such a giant. Nothing's ever going to surpass it, no matter what happens there. But there seems to be a little bit of a rising on the other end, where before you were talking about how. I remember I was reading an article of yours where you spoke about how conservatives really need to dip their toes more into the arts and need to start making more films and need to start doing things. And that's starting to happen now, especially on like a faith-based movie thing. It's been quite remarkable to see what's happening at that end. What's your kind of like your prediction about where things are going with this? Are things going to get back more to normal? Are people looking for the way things are, way things were, sorry? Or do you think there's going to be another shift that's going to just kind of sideswipe everything again? Because it's possibility that is like very huge as well, especially with the election next year. I mean, who knows what's going to happen there?
I think a couple of just broad comments. One, I think the future is change. I think change is happening more quickly than I've ever had in my lifetime. I think anyone who knows the future or says they know the future is fooling themselves because you never quite know. I think that as technology improves, we will see more and more, I guess you could call them upstart filmmakers and creators and talents competing with the big boys and girls of the world. I think that the rise of censorship scares me to death, and it literally keeps me up at night. And I don't see an opposing force big enough and strong enough to clamp it down, and that scares me. And I thought that force would be the press, the mainstream media. I thought they would put their partisanship aside and rally against it. They're not. They're actually doing the opposite. That scares me. So I mean, I think that rise could swamp everything that you and I are talking about. So that's my biggest fear. I mean, I think on a positive side, I think there's a lot of things happening that are to our benefit as consumers. You know, when our show ends here, we could essentially go watch any movie, any TV show in the history of mankind. What a
Yeah.
power. It's amazing. At a listen, there's always a few shows that are unavailable. There's always a few movies you can't see. But just generally speaking, you can do anything you want right now. You can watch anything you want. That's a powerful tool that we have. It also makes it really hard for new storytellers to crack that because they're competing against everything. So, I mean, I just think that the fact that we can see what we want to see when we want to see it is very powerful. It's very, we're lucky to have that in our lives. And, you know, I think the creative urge within all of us is still flickering and still alive. And I think there's always going to be another storyteller who wants to tell his or her story. And that keeps this entire game afloat. And that's a wonderful thing.
It is a wonderful thing. And I know one thing that I can always hold on to and hold dear, that I know that whatever happens out there, that you are always going to be there to cover it. You're always going to be the voice to really bring it to the masses. I know I can't tell how many times I've listened to your podcast, or I go to your website, or I follow you on social to something that comes up there that you're talking about or commenting on that I had no idea that was going on. And it becomes illuminating, educational, entertaining as well. And I really urge everyone out there to go listen to and subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. It is really, like, in my opinion, a one-of-a-kind kind of podcast, because not only, Christian, have you been doing it for a long time, not only have you found your voice, but like I said, you have guests on and you're covering the news that a lot of people aren't covering. And I really respect that and I really enjoyed that. And I think everyone needs to get out there and get on it. And where else, Christian, can people find you online so they can get on your stuff?
Well, on X, I'm at Hollywood in Toto. That is my brand, and I'm pretty consistent across the different platforms. But yeah, just the website and the podcast are my main passions right now. I do contribute to Outkick.com and also the Daily Wire. But yeah, no, thank you for the kind words. I mean, one of the things I try to do with the work I do is to let people know about certain subjects, about certain artists, about certain people who deserve a bigger platform. And I think that's important. So I think we can all do that. And, you know, I think we can all feel powerless in society today because we don't have all the money, we don't have all the fame, don't have the big platforms, but we can all do our part. We can all chip into a crowdfunding campaign for an artist who needs a break, or we can all just do a couple of quick shares on social media, and all of a sudden the story you thought was important is being seen by many more people than ever before. So I don't think we're powerless. I think we just need to kind of realize what our voice is and rise up. And I think that could mean everything.
Well, Christian, I thank you so very much for your time today. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And again, everyone, check out Christian's stuff. I'm going to have links in the show notes. Click on it, read, watch, listen. You will love it. Thank you so much, Christian.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.